There was a moment in November 1944 when 12 German women, prisoners of war, stood in an Iowa mess hall staring at something they'd never seen before. Brown, sticky, smelling like nothing from their homeland. The American guards watched nervously as the women examined the mysterious substance with growing suspicion. "Das ist kein Essen," one whispered. "This is not food." They had no idea they were looking at something that would soon become their most requested item, something they'd fight over, trade for, even write home about. But first, they had to get past the belief that Americans were serving them industrial paste. Subscribe for more untold stories of how small moments changed everything during the war. The women standing in that mess hall weren't just any prisoners. They were auxiliaries, support staff who'd been captured during the final Allied push through France. Teachers, nurses, clerks, women who'd never expected to see combat, let alone end up 6,000 miles from home in the middle of the American Midwest. Greta Hoffman, the unofficial leader, had spent the last 3 months trying to keep 12 frightened women calm, dignified, and hopeful. She'd succeeded through the Atlantic crossing, through the processing centers, through their first weeks in Camp Algona. But now, staring at this brown mystery substance, she felt her authority slipping. Because how do you lead when you don't understand the basics of where you are? How do you maintain dignity when you can't even identify what's on your plate? The November wind rattled the mess hall windows as the women gathered around their assigned tables. Outside, the Iowa landscape stretched flat and endless, so different from the cramped streets of Hamburg or the rolling hills of Bavaria. Inside, industrial ceiling fans circulated warm air that carried the mingled scents of coffee, bread, and something else. Something sweet and nutty that made Greta's nose twitch with uncertainty. Sam Washington emerged from the kitchen carrying a wooden tray loaded with glass jars. His white apron was spotless despite the morning's cooking, and his movements carried the careful precision of a man who understood that feeding people was more than just a job. It was communication. At 43, Sam had spent 20 years cooking in various capacities restaurants in Montgomery, a hotel in Chicago, and now here, feeding thousands of German prisoners who'd never asked to cross an ocean. He placed one jar on each table with gentle care, as if presenting gifts rather than rations. The glass containers gleamed under the overhead lights, their contents a uniform brown that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. No steam rose from them. No crystals sparkled on the surface, just smooth, dense paste that sat motionless in its container. "Ladies," Sergeant William Parker announced from the front of the hall, his voice carrying the practiced authority of a man who'd given 10,000 orders in his military career. "Today you'll be trying an American staple. It's called peanut butter. Spread it on your bread. You'll find it quite nutritious." The translation came from Corporal James Fletcher, whose halting German had been learned from a phrase book rather than natural study. "Erdnuss butter," he said, stumbling over the compound word, "für das Brot." Greta exchanged glances with Liesel Wagner, the youngest of their group at 19. Liesel's eyes were wide with that mixture of curiosity and apprehension that seemed to define their entire American experience. Every day brought something new, something that required them to recalibrate their understanding of the world. At the table nearest the kitchen, Anna Schultz leaned forward to examine the jar more closely. At 34, she'd worked as a secretary in Berlin before the war consumed everything familiar. Her practical nature had kept her alive through situations that would have broken softer spirits. She unscrewed the lid with careful fingers, revealing the substance fully to the air. The smell intensified immediately. Roasted. Earthy, with an underlying sweetness that seemed wrong somehow, as if someone had taken something savory and confused it with dessert. Anna brought the jar closer to her nose, inhaling deeply. Her eyebrows drew together in concentration. "Es riecht wie geröstete Nüsse," she said uncertainly. "It smells like roasted nuts." "Erdnuss means peanut," Greta said quietly, her teacher's mind working to make connections. "So this is butter made from peanuts?" The concept made no sense. Butter came from milk, from cream churned until it solidified. How did one make butter from nuts? The logical impossibility of it troubled Greta more than the unfamiliar smell. Across the hall, 12 jars sat open now, 12 groups of women leaning in to investigate this latest American mystery. Some tables showed more boldness than others. At one, a woman named Margaret Klein had already dipped her finger into the paste, pulling it out to watch long strands stretch between her finger and the jar's surface. The consistency was unlike anything in her experience. Not liquid, not solid, but something stubbornly in between. Wie Schmierfett, Margaret muttered, like axle grease. The comparison spread through the room in whispered German, women nodding in agreement. Yes, that's exactly what it looked like. The brown paste mechanics used to lubricate machinery. From his position near the serving line, Sam watched their reactions with growing unease. He'd expected surprise, maybe some confusion, but not this level of obvious disgust. These were the same women who'd accepted corn on the cob after initial hesitation, who'd learned to appreciate American coffee even if they found it weak compared to their own traditions. Peanut butter was simpler than corn, more straightforward than the Jell-O that had confused them last week. Wasn't it? Greta made her decision. As the unofficial leader, it fell to her to test unknown things first. She'd tasted the soup on their first day to ensure it wasn't poisoned. She'd tried the cornbread when others refused. This brown paste would be no different. She picked up the knife provided beside her plate and carefully scooped out a small portion, spreading it across a slice of white bread with movements that mimicked proper table manners, even in these improper circumstances. The paste didn't spread so much as stick and tear. The bread pulled apart under the knife's pressure, creating holes that immediately filled with more of the brown substance. Greta frowned, adjusting her technique, using less pressure. Slowly, unevenly, the peanut butter covered roughly half the bread slice. 11 pairs of eyes watched her raise the bread toward her mouth. The mess hall had gone quiet, except for the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock and the distant clatter of pots from the kitchen. Even the American guards had stopped their conversations to watch this moment of cultural collision. Greta took a small bite. Her teeth sank into soft bread, then met resistance from the paste. The texture hit her first thick, coating her mouth instantly, sticking to her teeth and the roof of her mouth with aggressive persistence. Then came the taste. Salty and sweet simultaneously. Nutty in a way she'd never experienced. Rich, heavy, overwhelming. Her face contorted involuntarily, not from disgust exactly, but from sheer sensory overload. The paste clung to every surface in her mouth, refusing to dissolve, demanding to be chewed and chewed again. She reached for her water cup, swallowing hard to clear the thickness from her throat. "Und?" Liesel asked breathlessly. "And?" Greta set down the bread carefully, wiping her mouth with the cloth napkin. She searched for honest words that wouldn't betray the leadership these women needed from her. "Es ist sehr intensiv," she managed. "It is very intense." That diplomatic response shattered when Anna Schultz decided to try her own sample. She'd always been bolder than Greta, less concerned with maintaining appearances. Anna scooped a full spoonful directly from the jar and placed it on her tongue. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Her eyes widened in shock. Her hand flew to her mouth. For 3 long seconds, she sat frozen, processing sensations her German upbringing had never prepared her for. Then, she grabbed her napkin and spit the peanut butter into it with force. "Das ist Gift!" Anna declared loudly, her voice carrying across the entire mess hall. "That is poison." She turned to the nearest guard, Corporal Fletcher, and held up the napkin as evidence. "What are you feeding us? This is not food. This is... She struggled for the English word, finally settling on machine oil. Fletcher's face flushed red. "Ma'am, I assure you it's perfectly safe. We eat it all the time." "Then you are crazy," Anna shot back, her English improving with indignation. "No person with sense would eat this." At the next table, Margaret Klein had made her own attempt and was now drinking water in desperate gulps, trying to wash away the coating that seemed determined to stay in her mouth forever. "Es klebt wie Leim," she gasped between drinks. "It sticks like glue." The mess hall erupted in a mixture of nervous laughter and rapid German conversation. Women compared their experiences, their voices rising in animated disgust. Several hadn't even tried it yet, and were now declaring they never would. The substance that sat so innocently in its jars had become the enemy, proof that Americans either had no taste or were deliberately serving them something inedible as punishment. From the kitchen doorway, Sam Washington felt each criticism like a physical blow. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. Food is love made visible, Samuel. When you cook for someone, you're saying they matter. He'd been saying these women mattered, that despite the war, despite the uniforms and the barbed wire, they deserved something good, something American and normal and kind. But they were spitting it into napkins, calling it poison, comparing it to industrial lubricants. Sergeant Parker stepped forward, his jaw tight with frustration. Ladies, that's enough. This is standard military ration. Millions of American soldiers eat peanut butter every single day. It's protein, it's filling, and it's what we're serving. Greta stood up slowly, understanding that this moment could spiral into something worse if she didn't intervene. We appreciate the meal, Sergeant, she said in careful English, each word pronounced with her schoolteacher's precision. But this, peanut butter, it is very different from our food. Perhaps we need time to become familiar. You don't have to eat it if you don't want to, Parker replied, his tone softening slightly. But it'll be available at every meal. Might as well get used to it. The women returned to their regular lunch vegetable soup, bread without spread, weak coffee. But the jars remained on the tables, accusatory and strange. Some women pushed theirs toward the center, creating distance. Others kept stealing glances at the brown paste, perhaps wondering if they'd been too harsh in their judgment. Only Liesl Wagner sat quietly, watching the American guards at their own table across the room. They were making sandwiches, she noticed, thick layers of peanut butter between white bread slices, eaten with obvious enjoyment. One young soldier even licked his fingers after finishing. They weren't pretending, Liesl realized. The Americans genuinely liked this strange paste. She watched Corporal Fletcher take an enormous bite of his sandwich, chewing contentedly while reviewing paperwork. If it was truly as terrible as Anna claimed, why would they eat it voluntarily? Why would they smile while doing it? The question nagged at her through the afternoon work detail, through the evening count, through the quiet hours before lights out. In the barracks that night, the 12 women gathered in their usual circle, speaking in low German voices that created a bubble of familiarity in this foreign place. I still taste it, Margaret complained, running her tongue over her teeth. Hours later, and it's still there. My stomach hurts, another woman added, though whether from the peanut butter or from eating so little lunch, no one could say. Anna Schultz remained defiant. They're testing us, seeing how much we'll tolerate before we complain. Next week it will be something even worse. But Greta wasn't so sure. She'd been watching Sam Washington's face during lunch, had seen the genuine hurt in his eyes when Anna called his offering poison. That wasn't the expression of a man playing cruel games. That was the look of someone whose kindness had been rejected. What if, Greta said slowly, we are the ones who don't understand? The circle went quiet. Outside, November wind howled across the Iowa plains, rattling the barracks windows in their frames. In Hamburg, Greta continued, when we had nothing but black bread and cabbage, would we have rejected food just because it seemed strange? My mother used to say that hunger is the best cook. Perhaps we're not hungry enough yet to appreciate what they're offering. You think we should eat that? That paste? Anna's voice carried disbelief. I think, Greta said carefully, that we should try to understand it before we judge it. The Americans eat it happily. It must have some value we're not seeing. Liesl spoke up from her corner cot. I want to try again, tomorrow. Just a small amount, but properly this time. Not expecting it to taste like German food, just tasting it for what it is. 3 days passed before the second attempt. The peanut butter jars appeared at every meal, untouched by the German women, slowly consumed by the guards who seemed genuinely puzzled by the prisoners' resistance. Sam stopped watching from the kitchen doorway. The rejection had stung too deeply, but Liesl had been observing, learning. She noticed that Americans didn't eat peanut butter plain. They spread it thin, paired it with sweet jam, or ate it with apples from the camp orchard. They treated it as one component of a meal, not the entire focus. On the fourth morning, Liesl took her usual seat at breakfast. The jar sat in its familiar spot at the table's center. She reached for it with steady hands, aware that several women at nearby tables were watching her. This time, she used much less. Just a thin scraping across her toast, barely enough to color the bread. Then she added a spoonful of the apple preserves that had appeared alongside the peanut butter, another American mystery, but one that smelled sweet and safe. The first bite was different. The sweetness of the preserves balanced the heavy saltiness of the peanut butter. The toast provided texture, preventing that suffocating coating sensation. Together, the three elements created something that was not terrible, actually almost pleasant. Liesl took another bite, chewing thoughtfully. The nutty flavor made more sense now, complemented rather than fighting against the other tastes. She could feel why Americans might enjoy this. It was filling in a way that jam alone wasn't. Substantial, satisfying. "Well?" Greta asked quietly from across the table. "Try it with the jam," Liesl said, "and just a little, very thin." Greta prepared her own piece exactly as Liesl had done. Thin spread, added sweetness, careful bite. Her expression shifted from apprehension to surprise to cautious approval. "Es ist besser so," she admitted. "It's better this way." By the end of breakfast, 5 women had attempted the combination. None spit it out. None called it poison. The transformation wasn't dramatic. No sudden declarations of love for American food, but the wall of absolute rejection had developed its first cracks. Sam Washington noticed the change during lunch preparation the following week. For the first time since that disastrous introduction, he saw Greta Hoffman reach for the peanut butter jar without hesitation. She spread it carefully on bread, added jam, and ate it while reading an English newspaper that Sergeant Parker had approved for the women's language lessons. The sight made something tight in Sam's chest relax slightly. He'd been cooking for these women for almost 2 months now, trying to find the balance between military regulations and basic human decency. Every rejected meal felt personal, even when he knew it shouldn't. His daughter back in Montgomery always told him he cared too much about feeding people, that he took it too seriously. But how else should a man take it? Food was survival. Food was connection. Food was the most basic way of saying, you matter enough to keep alive. By December, the peanut butter consumption had increased noticeably. Not dramatically, these women weren't suddenly eating it by the spoonful, but steadily. A jar that used to last a week now emptied in 3 days. Sam found himself ordering more from the commissary, noting the change in his careful kitchen logs. The real shift came from an unexpected direction. Margaret Klein, who'd been among the most vocal critics, discovered that peanut butter could be mixed into hot oatmeal. The heat softened it, distributed it evenly, and created a creamy richness that reminded her just slightly of a dessert her grandmother used to make with hazelnuts and cream. She shared this discovery with the others during one of their evening gatherings. Within days, the morning oatmeal routine had transformed. Women who'd previously eaten it plain and joyless now stirred in small spoonfuls of peanut butter, sometimes adding a bit of honey if the kitchen had it available. Liesl took the experimentation further. She spread peanut butter on apple slices, creating a snack that sustained her through the long afternoon work details. The combination of crisp fruit and creamy paste became her preferred meal, something she actually looked forward to, rather than merely tolerated. "It's strange," she told Greta one evening as they sat on their bunks. 3 weeks ago I thought it was inedible. Now I think about it when I'm hungry. How does that happen?" Greta smiled, her teacher's mind recognizing a lesson in adaptation. "Because we stopped comparing it to what we knew and started accepting it for what it is. That's survival, Liesl. That's how we get through this." The cultural exchange began to flow both directions. Anna Schultz, whose initial rejection had been the most dramatic, found herself explaining to Corporal Fletcher why Germans preferred their bread dark and dense. He listened with genuine interest, then offered her a peanut butter sandwich on the white bread she'd once scorned. "Try it my way just once," Fletcher said with an encouraging smile. "My mom always said the secret is cutting off the crusts." Anna accepted the crustless sandwich with mock solemnity, aware that this small gesture represented something larger than bread and paste. She took a bite. It was ridiculous, this soft white bread with its sweet brown filling, nothing like the substantial rye and butter of her Berlin childhood. But it was also kind, and kindness, she was learning, could be tasted. The peanut butter began appearing in unexpected places. Greta used it as a reward during English lessons, offering a spoonful mixed with honey to whichever woman could correctly use a difficult verb, tense. The competition became fierce, women studying their vocabulary with new dedication just to earn that small, sweet prize. When Corporal Fletcher's birthday arrived in mid-December, the German women pooled their small personal allowances to buy him a jar from the camp commissary. They presented it wrapped in newspaper, their English carefully practiced. "Thank you for patience with our learning." Fletcher's eyes grew bright with emotion. He quickly blinked away. "You ladies didn't have to do this." "You share food with us," Greta explained, her pronunciation improving daily. "Now we share with you. Is fair, yes?" The gesture rippled through the guard staff. These weren't just prisoners to be watched and counted. They were women trying to find humanity in an inhuman situation. Women who'd learned to appreciate peanut butter not because they'd developed a sudden love for American food, but because they'd developed trust in American intentions. That trust faced its first serious test when the supply truck failed to arrive during the third week of December. A snowstorm had closed the roads from Des Moines, stranding the weekly delivery somewhere between the city and Camp Algona. The camp still had basic provisions, flour, canned vegetables, coffee, but the extras disappeared quickly, including peanut butter. Sam Washington rationed what remained in his pantry with careful mathematics. 12 women, 3 meals a day, 1 jar left. The numbers didn't work favorably. He could stretch it for maybe 2 days if everyone took only the smallest portions. After that, nothing until the roads cleared. He said nothing to the women at breakfast, simply placing the jar on the table as usual. But Greta noticed immediately that it was the same jar from yesterday, its level noticeably lower. She caught Sam's eye across the mess hall and saw the apology there before he looked away. The women noticed too. They'd become accustomed to full jars, to the abundance that characterized everything American. The half-empty container represented a crack in that abundance, a reminder that even here, resources had limits. "We should save it," Liesel said quietly, not reaching for the jar, "if this is all there is." Greta nodded, understanding the unspoken concern. What if the shortages worsened? What if this was the beginning of the deprivation they'd feared since capture? In wartime, small losses often preceded larger ones. But Anna Schultz had different thoughts. She reached for the jar, spread a generous portion on her bread, and took a deliberate bite. "No," she said firmly. "We don't hoard, we don't panic. That's what happened in Berlin, and it made everything worse. If this is the last jar, we share it properly until it's gone. Then, we wait for more." Her practical wisdom settled over the table like a calming hand. The women ate their portions without greed, but without excessive caution either. By dinner, the jar was indeed empty, scraped clean by 12 women who'd learned that sometimes accepting scarcity with dignity was its own form of strength. The roads stayed closed for 6 days. December wind piled snow against the barracks in white mountains that transformed Camp Algona into an isolated island. The guards shared their personal supplies of coffee and cigarettes. The kitchen staff stretched meals with creativity born from necessity. But there was no peanut butter. On the 4th day without it, something unexpected happened. Margaret Klein fell ill with a fever that left her shaking and nauseous in her bunk. The camp doctor examined her, prescribed rest and fluids, but everyone knew that recovery required more than medical orders. It required comfort, the kind that came from familiar things. In the kitchen, Sam found himself thinking about his daughter again. When Sarah was sick, she wanted only specific foods. Her grandmother's chicken soup, toast with butter and cinnamon, and yes, peanut butter mixed into warm milk with honey. The sweet richness soothed her throat and settled her stomach in ways that medicine alone never could. He had no peanut butter to offer Margaret. But he had something else, something he'd been saving in the back of the pantry for his own use. A small jar of almond butter purchased with his own money from a specialty store during his last trip to town. It wasn't the same, but it was close. Creamy, nutty, spreadable. Sam didn't hesitate. He prepared a bowl of warm milk, stirred in a spoonful of the almond butter and honey, and carried it to the women's barracks himself. The guards looked surprised to see the cook leaving his domain, but no one stopped him. Margaret was barely conscious when he arrived, her face flushed with fever. Greta sat beside her cot, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead with the tenderness of a mother caring for a sick child. "Mr. Washington," Greta said, surprised to see him. Sam held out the bowl. "My grandmother's recipe, for sick folks. It's not peanut butter, but it's similar. Might help her keep something down." Greta accepted the bowl with both hands, understanding the significance of this gesture. Sam had brought his own supplies, his personal resources, to help a woman who weeks ago had called his cooking poison. She lifted Margaret's head gently, bringing the bowl to her lips. "Drink, Margaret." Slowly. The sick woman swallowed a small sip, then another. The warm sweetness seemed to revive something in her, and her eyes fluttered open. "Danke," Margaret whispered, her voice hoarse but sincere. The German word for thanks needed no translation. Sam nodded once and left quietly, returning to his kitchen where pots needed stirring and regulations needed following. But something had shifted in that moment. The women talked about it that evening in hushed voices after lights out. Sam Washington had no obligation to share his personal supplies. No regulation required him to care whether a German prisoner felt comforted during illness. Yet, he'd done it anyway, crossing the invisible line between captor and captive to offer simple human kindness. When the supply truck finally arrived on December 23rd, it carried 12 jars of peanut butter among its cargo. Sam personally delivered them to the mess hall, placing one on each table like gifts. The women responded with genuine smiles, with "thank you" practiced in careful English, with an appreciation that went far beyond the food itself. Liesel Wagner started a tradition that day. She wrote the date on a scrap of paper and tucked it inside the empty jar from their table, along with a note in English that Greta had helped her compose. December 23rd, 1944. The day we learned that peanut butter means more than food. It means someone cares if we are fed. Other women followed her example, creating small-time capsules of their transformation. Anna wrote about learning to trust again. Margaret described how warmth and sweetness could heal more than just illness. Each jar became a record, a testament to the strange journey from rejection to acceptance. Christmas arrived with unexpected gentleness. The American Guards had prepared a special meal-roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, vegetables preserved from the autumn harvest. And for dessert, something Sam had created specifically for this occasion, peanut butter cookies still warm from the oven, dusted with sugar that sparkled under the mess hall lights. The women accepted these cookies with wonder, biting into them to discover that peanut butter could be transformed, could become something sweet and celebratory rather than merely sustaining. The taste brought tears to some eyes, though whether from the food itself or from the realization that they were being treated with such care, no one could say. Greta Hoffman stood during the meal, her water glass raised in a gesture that made the room fall quiet. "We wish to say thank you," she announced in English that had grown stronger over 3 months of practice. "For the food, for the kindness, for teaching us that even in war there can be." She struggled for the word, finally turning to Corporal Fletcher, who supplied it gently. "Humanity." "Yes," Greta continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Humanity. We did not expect this in America. We were told many things before we came. None of them were true. You showed us truth instead, with small things, with strange food, with patience." She raised her glass higher. "To peanut butter, and to the men who shared it." The guards raised their own glasses, many of them swallowing hard against unexpected emotion. Sergeant Parker, who'd maintained strict professional distance for months, allowed himself a genuine smile. In the kitchen, Sam Washington listened to the toast and felt his grandmother's presence as clearly as if she stood beside him. Food is love made visible. He'd been making love visible for 12 women who'd started as enemies and become something else entirely. Not friends, perhaps. The war made true friendship impossible. But fellow human beings deserving of nourishment, comfort, and care. The letters began going out in January, carried by Red Cross channels to families scattered across a shattered Germany. Liesel wrote to her mother in Bavaria, describing this strange American paste that had become precious. Anna's letter to her sister in Berlin included a request. "If you can find peanuts, though I know they're rare. Try roasting them and grinding them smooth. Add a little salt and oil. You'll create something that reminds me of better days." Greta's letter to her daughter was simplest and most profound. "I've learned that the world is larger than we were taught, that people we called enemies make food with care and offer it with hope, that something as small as peanut butter can teach you to see differently. I want you to grow up knowing this, Liebling, that humanity lives in unexpected places, even in brown paste that tastes like roasted hope." The war would continue for months more. Victory in Europe would come in May, bringing with it the complicated joy of liberation mixed with the devastating knowledge of what had been lost. The 12 women would eventually return to a Germany they barely recognized, carrying with them lessons learned in an Iowa prisoner camp. But they would never forget the peanut butter. Years later, in kitchens across rebuilt German cities, some of them would seek out this American food in specialty shops. They'd spread it on bread for their children and grandchildren, telling stories about the war that focused not on battles or politics, but on the moment they learned that even enemies could share a meal. Because that's what peanut butter had taught them in the end. Not that American food was superior, or that their own traditions were wrong, but that survival sometimes meant accepting help from unexpected sources. That kindness could arrive in unfamiliar packages. That the distance between rejection and acceptance was shorter than pride wanted to admit. In Camp Algona, the mess hall continued serving peanut butter long after those first 12 women had departed. New prisoners arrived, experienced their own moments of confusion and resistance, and eventually found their way to appreciation. The cycle repeated with different faces, but the same essential truth. Sometimes the strangest things become the most meaningful, and sometimes a simple brown paste can bridge the distance between worlds. Sam Washington served out the war cooking for thousands, but he never forgot the day Anna Schultz called his offering poison, or the quieter day weeks later when she asked him to teach her how Americans made peanut butter sandwiches. Those moments defined his service more than any commendation or official recognition ever could, because he'd learned something too, standing in that kitchen and watching cultural barriers dissolve over shared meals, that his grandmother was right about food being love made visible, and that even in the darkest chapters of human history, even between people separated by language and war and ideology, a jar of peanut butter could become a declaration of shared humanity. The last jar from that first shipment sat on a shelf in the camp museum years later, preserved as an artifact of an unusual moment in military history. Inside, tucked carefully against the glass, were 12 small papers covered in German script. Stories of transformation, records of the day that strange became familiar, foreign became friendly, and rejection became acceptance. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons, but with patience, persistence, and the simple offering of something to eat. Sometimes victory looks like a woman spreading peanut butter on bread and smiling at the memory of how much she'd resisted something she'd come to treasure. Sometimes peace begins at a mess hall table, one small spoonful at a time. If you enjoyed this untold story from World War II, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. There are countless moments like this hidden in history, small human connections that changed everything. Leave a comment telling me what surprised you most about this story, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, remember that understanding often begins with the simple act of trying something new, even when everything in you wants to refuse.